On this Tuesday night, a stunning reversal from Donald Trump. The day after the president stood alongside Vladimir Putin and backed Russia over his own government, Trump says he simply misspoke. But is it too late to control the damage? We'll hear from a prominent Republican insider who says his party's reputation is crumbling.
Also tonight, an inside look at a data breach that held the personal medical information of thousands for ransom. Plus, a surprising discovery on the hunt for a new planet. This is The National.
In the face of criticism, Donald Trump is better known for doubling down than backing down. Today, he did neither, but the White House was definitely on the defensive after yesterday's public display with Putin. Trump's words overseas sparked so much backlash at home that now he's trying to sell the opposite message. But who's buying? Paul Hunter is in Washington.
Of all the possible retorts to the fierce criticism faced by Trump for what's been called his shameful, disgraceful, treasonous stance with Russia's Vladimir Putin, few expected this.
I realize that there is a need for some clarification.
Today in the White House, Trump's comeback, he misspoke. To recap, yesterday on the world stage in Helsinki, when asked, with Putin at his side, about Russia's meddling in the 2016 U.S. election, Trump inexplicably sided not with U.S. intelligence, but with Putin.
He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
It set off a firestorm on Capitol Hill, mixing ridicule with fury, even among Republicans.
If it weren't so insulting, it would be kind of a joke.
But then, fully 24 hours after that news conference,
I actually went out and reviewed a clip of an answer that I gave.
Trump said he saw the transcript and had a realization.
In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia. So, just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't.
But it's not exactly nuance. It's precisely the opposite of how he put it with Putin. Today, Trump went on to say he has faith in the U.S. intelligence system, that he accepts Russia meddled in the election, though still saying it could have been others, adding, yet again, the Trump campaign had nothing to do with it regardless.
There was no collusion.
Think that's not a key point for him even on this day? Check the handwriting on his otherwise carefully printed notes. No collusion, it emphasizes. As for what he called his clarification, say Democrats.
President Trump tried to squirm away from what he said yesterday. It's 24 hours too late and in the wrong place.
If he wanted to make those comments, he should have had the strength to make them in front of Vladimir Putin.
And there's still the matter of what specifically did Trump and Putin talk about behind closed doors. Today, Trump listed some of the topics but gave few details. Democrats now want congressional hearings to force answers. Ian.
Paul, last night you told us about how even staffers in the White House were taken aback by Trump's comments in Helsinki. What about tonight?
You know, it almost feels out of control. Vanity Fair is reporting tonight that Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, was so furious about Trump's remarks in Helsinki and so helpless to pressure Trump on his own into retracting them that Kelly himself contacted Republicans on Capitol Hill, giving them permission to publicly slam Trump on this. And when that happened, Trump caved. It's come to that. All the reports within the West Wing suggest the place is a wreck. And beyond minor victories like Trump's backtrack today, no one has the fix for it. Ian.
Thanks, Paul. Well, for some analysis of the last 48 hours, let's bring in someone who knows Washington well. Conservative commentator and former speechwriter for George W. Bush, David Frum, currently a senior editor at The Atlantic. Now, David, you wrote an article yesterday where you raised the possibility, especially based on that news conference yesterday with the two presidents, that it seemed like Putin had some kind of hold, some kind of sway over Donald Trump. Now given President Trump's change of heart or clarification today, do you feel the same way?
Well, President Trump today read a script that he's read at various times in the past, in which he, with the words in front of him, said, I endorse what all the intelligence agencies unanimously say, that the Russians did interfere in the 2016 election. He never is able to adhere to that script for very long, and for a good reason. Because if he acknowledges that the Russians interfered, it opens the way to the next question. Did that interference make a difference? Remember how close this election was, that it was decided by tens of thousands of votes in just 3 states. Consider how large the Russian effort was, how industrial it was. Consider how much more we are learning about it all the time. And consider how still uncertain we are about exactly the connection between the Donald Trump campaign and the Russians. We know they were willing to accept Russian help. That's what Donald Trump Jr. took a meeting explicitly on that subject. So Donald Trump understands most of the time that once he admits the Russians intervened to help him, the next question will be, how much difference did it make?
But this notion that Putin may have something on Donald Trump, there are many Americans who would be quick to embrace that theory, others who would sit back and say, sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory. In your article, you make a passing reference to, could it be bribery? Could it be blackmail? So let me ask you directly, what do you think it is? When
you move a magnet under a desk and we notice the iron filings move, you don't have to understand how magnetism works to notice that the two things are moving in tandem. I don't speculate what the nature of the hold that President Putin has over Donald Trump. I assume someday we will find out if it even exists. But what you can see is that Donald Trump consistently behaves in ways consistent with President Putin having a hold over him. And by the way, that is something that has been remarked by former directors of the CIA, former national intelligence directors, other senior intelligence officials who all have said, this looks like a hold. We don't know it, but we see the behaviors.
We have about 30 seconds left. 24 hours ago, people were talking about the White House and maybe even the Republican Party being in crisis. Given this correction by President Trump, is that the case tonight?
Crisis is the wrong word. It's a slow crumbling of the ground under their feet, because there is going to be more exploration of what the connections were. The last round of indictments from Special Counsel Robert Mueller showed that the Russians had stolen, had not just placed ads, but they stole crucial information that belonged to the Democratic Party. What happened to that information? That's going to be a very important question.
David Frum, really nice speaking with you.
Thank you, Aaron.
So as we heard, a Washington insider concerned about the state of the Republican Party. And over the last 36 hours, we've heard lots of outrage, lots of strong language over Trump and Russia. But we wondered how this story is playing with Americans outside of D.C. We went to Maryland to find out.
So he's landed back in the United States, and he said now he accepts that the intelligence community found that Russian meddling did occur, and that he misspoke. He said he made a mistake.
I give him credit for admitting he was wrong.
The problem isn't Russia interfering with the American elections. America interferes with every election in the world, first of all. It's normal practice for other governments to meddle in elections for their benefit. It's nothing.
You don't fly over to Helsinki to shout insults at somebody. Okay, you don't fly over there to call the man a liar. You're trying to build a relationship.
Everybody's always focused on the Russia thing. Is it an important issue? Yes. But is this what 80% of Americans are focused on right now? No. People are trying to get by.
Well, on to another president now, and what some consider his most important speech since leaving the White House last year. Former President Barack Obama spoke at the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth in South Africa today. He didn't mention Trump by name, but Obama warned that politics around the globe has become more dangerous and more brutal.
And a politics of fear and resentment and retrenchment began to appear. And that kind of politics is now on the move. It's on a move at a pace that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. I am not being alarmist, I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning.
In the course of his 90-minute speech, Obama also called on South Africans to invoke the spirit of the anti-apartheid leader and push for a better world in the face of injustice and racism. Here's a look at what else we're working on tonight on The National. Astronomers discover new moons circling Jupiter, why one is on a so-called suicide orbit.
The backlog of refugee claimants waiting for a hearing has quadrupled in the last 2 years. What that means for the thousands crossing into Canada every year. But first, details of a major privacy breach at an Ontario home care provider. CBC News was contacted by the very people who claim they stole the data. They say they're holding it for ransom, the private records of at least tens of thousands of patients. Matthew Braga takes an inside look.
We want to start to be known as a technology-driven company.
Care Partners provides government-subsidized home care in Ontario. They've helped about 237,000 patients to date. But last month, Care Partners announced it was the victim of a data breach, that personal health and financial information of patients had been, quote, inappropriately accessed. And that was it. Until a group claiming responsibility for the breach reached out to CBC News and provided us with sample data suggesting the full extent of the breach. Thousands of patient records with detailed medical histories, including past surgeries and medications, along with health card numbers, phone numbers, and addresses dating back to 2010. Some of the files appear to contain names and contact information for more than 80,000 patients alone.
So how could someone access so much information? Well, the attackers claimed it was easy, that they had been stealing information for months, undetected, thanks to weak passwords and outdated software, and that none of the data was encrypted. All of this to prove a point, that Care Partner security was lax, and also to make a little money.
They told us they requested compensation, in other words, a ransom, in exchange for their efforts and a promise not to leak the data online. It's not clear if or when the data will be posted. Care Partners gave us a statement. The company said it takes the safeguarding of personal health and financial information seriously, that it regularly updates its software and relies on a leading third-party company to manage its computers and networks. And Care Partners also says it has reached out to those affected.
I haven't heard anything about Care Partners.
Arthur Redublo is one of 10 patients we reached who were unaware there had been a breach. He calls the news troubling.
Most emails now have encryption, and most files are behind some type of firewall where you cannot be accessed externally. So that is surprising that they, if they didn't take the proper steps to at least handle those types of files.
Waterloo police are now investigating. Under Ontario law, healthcare providers are required to store health records securely and take precautions against theft, loss, or unauthorized access. In a statement, the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario said it is assessing the company's response and whether the breach could have been prevented in the first place.
So, Matthew, if there are rules in place, why didn't they work? What slipped through the cracks?
So there are laws around how you protect information, how you have to safeguard information, but it doesn't really get into specifics about the how. So how a company approaches things like encryption, how it handles software updates, that's sort of up to them to interpret as they see fit in their current situation. And certainly in this case, whatever measures they put in place clearly did not work as planned. Now, there are fines for violations. Violations can lead to prosecution, but this doesn't happen very often. We've only seen about 4 cases where people have been fined by the Information Commissioner in Ontario, and the maximum fine was only about $25,000. So these fines can reach up to about $100,000 for individuals and $500,000 for companies, but we haven't even seen anything that really approaches that. So perhaps not as much of a deterrent in that sort of area either.
And if I could just ask you one more thing. I mean, on the question of whether we ought even to be engaging with the attackers as journalists in order to do this story, I mean, we should explain some of the thinking behind that.
Sure. So in a case like this, I think there is certainly a public interest argument to be made, right? We have not only just the immense number of records that we're looking at, thousands of patient records, contact information, financial information in a handful of cases, stuff that's very, very sensitive. And so I think people would want to appreciate exactly how that information is being safeguarded, what steps are being taken to make sure that it can't be accessed. And that's certainly, I think, the eye that we've kind of taken to this story and why we've chosen to pursue it the way we did.
Matthew Braga, thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Well, if you consider yourself middle class but still feel like you're struggling financially, you are by no means alone. According to a new study, even people with higher incomes can sometimes feel like they're struggling to stay afloat. Nearly a third of Canadians in a survey say they worry about money often or all the time. And about a quarter say they can't afford dental care, have been unable to pay a utility bill, or have had to borrow money for groceries. That's a lot of people. And as Jacqueline Hansen shows us, that finding is giving us a glimpse into why defining poverty is so difficult.
I've got canned peaches from the food bank. I'd like to have fresh peaches.
Fresh food is one of the basics that Amber Cannon often goes without. She didn't always struggle to get by. Cannon went to school and got a job.
I could put away money for a vacation with me and my son and be a part of life.
But mental health issues made it difficult to work full-time. Now Cannon works 1 day a week as a cashier, relies on government support, and misses out on a lot.
I had a friend who got married last year, and she had a wedding party in Calgary, and I wasn't able to attend because I didn't have a gift for her.
Based on incomes, nearly 5 million Canadians live in poverty. But a new study by the Angus Reid Institute found even more people may be struggling, due in part to the rising costs of housing and childcare.
Being poor or not being able to afford the basics isn't just the domain of people who aren't working or who are underemployed.
Even of those people surveyed who identified as struggling the most, 1 in 5 make between $50,000 and $100,000, well above what's considered low income. But in some of Canada's biggest cities, that money may not go far enough.
We need to have a rethink and maybe reframe the way we see living poor and struggling in this country.
Feeling poor not only affects quality of life, but also the choices people make.
They're focused on the here and now.
Avni Shah studies why people make the financial decisions they do. She says that those who struggle are less likely to seek out higher earning jobs when there's risk involved.
Basically saying, well, what I have now is sustaining me, and so I don't want to give this particular option up in favor of potentially a higher earning paycheck.
But Shah also says those experiencing financial hardship are sometimes the first to offer a helping hand.
That's the very wonderful aspect of poverty, is when you have that community that comes together and looks after you.
Another experience of poverty in Canada that can't be captured solely by how much money people make. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, we are keeping tabs on a number of other developing stories tonight, including the suspension of a police officer after last week's security scare in Toronto. The accusation that the officer leaked sensitive information about the threat of a potential vehicle ramming attack in the downtown core. You might remember the police service ramped up security around the CN Tower last Thursday after what it initially called an unconfirmed, uncorroborated piece of information. The officer accused of leaking more details has been suspended with pay while an internal investigation gets underway. And some developing news out of Ottawa tonight on the case of former child refugee Abdul Abdi. Canada's public safety minister says the government will stop trying to have him deported. Abdi bounced around to 31 different foster and group homes and in 2014 served time for attacking a police officer. That could have meant being deported back to Somalia, but a federal judge ruled the government ignored his charter rights in trying to deport him. And lots more still ahead tonight on The National. You may think video rental stores are a thing of the past, but they're not quite. You'll hear from employees at a Blockbuster, the very last one standing in North America.
Susan Ormiston goes inside Facebook to find out how the network tries to scrub itself of violent content. Plus, a global initiative with a cheeky name that helps entrepreneurs find the upside in their downfalls.
Especially with social media, we only see the highlights of people's lives.
Hearing about people who actually face failure, big failures, bigger than I could imagine having and succeeding, that's inspiring stuff, man. That got my juices flowing tonight.
So far this year, more than 11,000 asylum seekers have snuck across the U.S. border into Canada. That's putting heat on the government as the number of backlogged cases grows. Here's the bad news. The average wait time for a refugee claim to be heard has grown from 16 months last October to 20 months. But some progress has been made in clearing these cases. Karen Pauls looks at one example.
After a year of anxious waiting, some good news.
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Guled Omar's refugee claim has been accepted, paving the way for him to eventually become a Canadian citizen.
I'm feeling happy. I'm just shaking.
When CBC News first met Guled and his friend Abdikader Omar in Mexico City more than a year ago, they had already escaped death threats in Somalia and a refugee camp in Kenya. Their goal, Canada.
For me, U.S.A. is not an option. They are against an immigrant, refugees, and especially someone like me who is a Muslim, at the same time black, at the same time a Somali.
On the 2017 Canada Day long weekend, they crossed into Manitoba and filed their refugee claims.
Side by side with you, shoulder to shoulder.
They waited for their hearings, which were postponed for almost a year. So they found work in Alberta. Guled now knows his claim was successful, but Abdikader's hearing is still a month away. He can hardly wait.
As a young man and who want to have a future in Canada and have a safe life in Canada, so that's the main gate, that's the key, the entry point.
New data show the average wait for a refugee board hearing now is 20 months or longer. The Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada is shifting resources to clear these irregular cases faster, but this lawyer says it's not enough.
There's so many people coming across the border. Some people are moving from other provinces here, from Quebec, from Toronto, because they think that Manitoba is a bit not as congested. So now they're making the backlog worse here.
Hello?
Today, Guled Omar just wants to share the good news with his wife back in Kenya.
They granted me as asylum in Canada.
Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
As Karen said, immigration officials have managed to speed up the process for some of these so-called irregular border crossers. But as the stream of asylum seekers continues to flow, it's not enough to keep the backlog from piling up. 2 years ago, more than 13,000 cases were pending, including irregular claimants and those who arrived at official border crossings. A year later, that number nearly doubled. As of last month, it had quadrupled. But the government has committed $74 million, part of that to hire more people to decide cases. Once the department is fully staffed, it says the average wait time for a hearing should drop from the current 20 months to 12. Still to come on The National. You can learn a lot from people's tales of triumph and maybe more from their stories of mistakes. The irreverent path for struggling entrepreneurs to turn failure into success.
Plus, as Blockbuster closes 2 of its last 3 stores in North America, the employees at the very last one tell us why their jobs still matter.
Our regulars are great. Yeah, we see them every day. Yeah. We know their kids. We know a lot about them. So it's not just about customers and people coming in and getting movies. It's about us connecting with people that we get to see every day.
We have removed content from the InfoWars page to the extent that it's violated our policies. They have not reached the threshold at which their entire...
What's the threshold?
Down. It depends, Congressman, on the nature of the violation.
That's Monica Bickert, an executive at Facebook, being grilled by U.S. lawmakers today about how fake news and other questionable content gets filtered on the platform. Now, Bickert never did give specifics on what the threshold for removing content is, but Susan Ormiston was able to get a few more answers from her just a few weeks ago when she traveled to the company's headquarters in California.
We don't remove something just for being upsetting or offensive, but ultimately we will only remove something if it crosses the line into, for instance, hate speech or bullying or harassment. Where we draw the line is if people start attacking other people based on their race, their religion, other characteristics that are sensitive or protected.
What about sex? What about being a woman?
Yes, if somebody criticizes somebody else or attacks somebody solely on the basis of her gender, we will remove that comment.
Identifying harmful posts or fake accounts is becoming such a challenge, the company is growing an army of content reviewers, now 7,500 spread throughout the world.
Every day, people from all over the world share billions of things on Facebook.
Recently, for the first time, Facebook published its standards for what is or is not acceptable content, revealing how it decides to pull content or leave it up.
If you see something that you think violates these standards, report it by clicking the report link.
Facebook is struggling to contain fake news, like the so-called news recently that Florida's Parkland students were paid actors. It circulated widely on Facebook and was patently untrue. For news that is deemed questionable, Facebook says it will shrink the prominence of those posts on your feed.
Why not label it false? Why not say this is fake?
What we're realizing is that it's actually better, it's more successful, and people like it more if we simply provide them with more context to understand what they're seeing and how that fits with the other news that is online.
So are you saying people reacted poorly or negatively towards tagging information that was false when they thought it was true?
I'm saying that we're testing different approaches to see what works best in getting people the context and the information they need to discern whether something is true.
Facebook is still trying to recover from the U.S. election scandal when it became a tool for Russian trolls spreading false news.
We know that there were accounts before the 2016 election that shouldn't have been there. Those were fake accounts, they were inauthentic accounts, they didn't belong on Facebook, and we should have found them faster. We're developing technical tools that look for signals that tell us when an account might be fake. And now our tools are good enough that there are more than 1 million accounts per day that we stop at the time of creation because we know that they are fake.
1 million a day?
Yes.
That's a pretty big number.
This is a sign that our tools are getting much better and that we'll be able to keep the site much cleaner from this sort of content.
Now, as you heard Susan mention, keeping the site clean is up to a team of reviewers. Every day, they're faced with one toxic post after another. Some of it so vile, it can leave a lasting impact. So Susan has more now on the staggering task of policing the darkest corners of the world's largest social network.
It's as if Pandora's box is open and all the evils on social media are spilling out.
Hey, this nigga up, he represents Trump.
The torture of a mentally handicapped youth went live on Facebook before it could be stopped.
This is up, man, because, innocent people about to die today.
This man's intent to murder was also posted live on Facebook.
Like I said, I killed 13, so I'm working on 14 as we speak.
These Canadian university women suffered violent and sexist posts. Facebook pulled down 21 million posts of adult nudity or porn and 2.5 million examples of hate speech in just 3 months this year. But like a cancer, it keeps coming back.
I was a spam analyst.
Sarah Katz worked at Facebook for 8 months in 2016. We met her at a cafe in Palo Alto, California. Her sole job was to review content, up to 8,000 posts a day, and decide whether to pull them down or leave them up.
Primarily pornography, sometimes bestiality, child pornography. There was a lot of that. Obviously, the child trafficking was the content that stayed with me the most. What did you witness? It was... Am I okay to speak here? Okay, I don't want to bother people. There was a girl, she was about 12, and a little boy was 9. And they were standing facing each other and they didn't have pants on, and there was someone off the camera. He was speaking another language, but they were touching each other, so he's probably just telling them what to do. So that was disturbing because I'd never seen anything like that.
Robinson was approached by a man who killed him in cold blood.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him.
Violent, hateful content is rising as Facebook doubles down on efforts to find it, jacking up the number of content reviewers from 4,500 last year to 7,500 this year and growing.
If you look at the bigger picture, there are lots of horrible things that are happening in the world.
James Mitchell is Director of Risk and Response at Facebook's headquarters in Menlo Park, California.
Naturally, that behavior begins to manifest itself on Facebook, not just there, but in a whole host of other ways.
People are using Facebook to manifest these very violent and toxic things that are happening.
Yep, yeah, I know.
And you guys you just have to live with that, because if it's open, it's open. Is that the response?
I think the way to look at that is the content reviewer's job is to try to minimize that. And I think that's something that the team takes a great deal of satisfaction in, knowing that their job is to minimize those negative experiences that people might have. I think we certainly see ourselves as a team that has the ability to minimize that harm in the world.
All right, safe to delete. Delete, ignore. It's delete.
But the costs of policing the world's evil are growing.
Ignore, delete.
A new documentary, The Cleaners, exposes how Facebook hires inexpensive labor in countries like the Philippines to monitor content. An intense job with some nasty side effects.
I've seen hundreds of beheadings. Ignore, delete, ignore, delete, delete, ignore, delete, delete, ignore, delete, ignore, delete.
Until recently, this work was mostly in the shadows.
Delete, ignore.
The filmmakers say they got no access to Facebook or the contracting companies who hire the workers offshore. Their film headlined at Toronto's Hot Docs Festival.
They are hiding the debate, they are hiding the dilemma they are facing with building these platforms and not feeling responsible for what goes on these platforms.
Sarah Roberts, an academic at U.C.L.A., was a consultant to the filmmakers.
It is the unpleasant underbelly. It is the necessary evil. And it doesn't bring revenue. It doesn't generate positive affect. It does the opposite. It costs money.
Roberts has been tracking content review in social media for 10 years as the volume has just exploded.
We're talking about billions of posts per day when it comes to Facebook. We're talking about 400 hours of video content per minute, 24/7. We're talking about YouTube. So this amount is vast. But really, even 20,000 workers, I mean, how can they reasonably adjudicate a platform of billions of users?
The social media giants are being forced to come clean and protect against the mental repercussions of workers looking at millions of troubling posts every day.
You definitely do grow desensitized. Facebook is very upfront about how you will be viewing graphic material. So they have you sign a waiver. At the time I was there was no counseling. I didn't really personally feel the need for counseling, but I did meet some folks whom I believe it would have benefited.
We try to ensure that everybody gets and has resources for psychological counseling. And that's extraordinarily important as we think about the wellness of the people that are working on these issues.
But Mitchell acknowledges the volume of extreme material is rising, will rise, and get more nuanced. So increasing the numbers of content reviewers won't solve all the problems.
The other big wild card is just the way the world continues to evolve.
Do you think you'll have to be more of a policeman and less of an open platform?
Well, I think from the perspective of content reviewers, we've always played that policeman role. So much of what we do and we see is dependent on what people are sharing. And that's changing every few months. And so that dynamic nature to content that's being shared on our platform will continue to create challenges for us.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Menlo Park, California.
From the dark corners of the web to some new light on our solar system. A team of astronomers from the Carnegie Institution for Science has an exciting new find: 12 new moons orbiting Jupiter. The scientists stumbled onto them by chance while hunting for other far-flung objects out past Pluto.
Not only are we looking to detect hypothetical planets at the edge of our solar system, but we're discovering moons by accident.
They were spotted using a 520 megapixel camera attached to a huge telescope in Chile. To put that in perspective, the latest iPhone camera is 12 megapixels. The new moons are tiny, each of them just 1 to 3 kilometers wide, one of them being described as an oddball.
Not only is it going the opposite direction to many of the other moons, but it's also passing through their orbits, and it's very likely to crash into them.
Essentially, it's like driving down the highway the wrong way. It is possible some of those smaller moons are actually pieces of a once larger moon that was broken in a collision. And in case you're wondering, Jupiter's lunar count is now up to 79.
On the National tonight, the owner of the Las Vegas casino that was the scene of a mass shooting is suing more than 1,000 victims of the attack. But MGM Resorts isn't seeking any money. It's suing to prevent future lawsuits. They want a judge to rule on a law brought in after 9/11 to shield federally certified security firms from liability in terrorist attacks. And MGM says it hired one of those companies, so technically victims shouldn't be able to sue them either. 58 people were killed and hundreds of others were hurt when a gunman opened fire at the Mandalay Bay in October 2017. Authorities in BC confirm another hiker has died after being swept over a waterfall. It happened last night, northeast of Vancouver at Golden Ears Provincial Park. The RCMP say a 21-year-old man from Toronto was swept away by a current. Another man tried to save him, and he too was swept over the falls, but he's expected to survive. It comes 2 weeks after 3 other people were killed in BC after they were swept over a waterfall in Squamish.
I've used this clinic many times, as my husband has too, and it was a shock when I heard.
Health officials in Ottawa are warning thousands of people they may be at risk of infection due to improperly cleaned medical equipment at a walk-in clinic. No infections have been reported, but 4,600 people who underwent minor surgical procedures at the Main Street Family Medical Center are being advised to get tested for hepatitis B and C, as well as HIV. And they're being told the problem may go all the way back to 2003. And we're keeping an eye tonight on Thailand. In just hours, those 12 young soccer players and their coach rescued from that cave last week are expected to be released from hospital. They're getting out a day early. Officials say they've recovered faster than expected. And once they're out, we are expecting them to speak to the media for the first time about their ordeal.
The cyclones for my vacuum cleaner took over 5,000 prototypes. That's 5,000 failures before I'd cracked it. So the moral of the tale is keep on failing. It works.
That was James Dyson talking about one of his greatest inventions. Entrepreneurs sure can absorb a lot from other people's successes, but perhaps it's their mistakes that offer the greatest lessons. The stories of effing up are colorful, and the language, well, brace yourself.
I'm Marsha Drucker, and I'm the founder and director of Fuck Up Nights Toronto.
All right. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. Is everyone ready to hear some fuck-ups? Amazing. We're so obsessed with success. You know, we only want to talk about the companies and the people that are doing really well, the unicorns of the world. But there's so much more that we can learn from failure. Fuck Up Nights is definitely a really edgy name, and it just creates this environment that's really authentic. You know, if you're gonna fail and you have some kind of major business screw up, you're gonna swear, and it's only natural.
I kind of want to share with you just the things that I've learned about my own fuck up with my first startup.
This fuck up starts when I had my first company.
After that fuck up, I just thought, oh, it's over. Okay, nothing matters.
The format of the talks are kind of similar to what you would see in a TED Talk. So each speaker gets 7 to 10 minutes and 10 images to share their failure story.
We had this idea. We would make websites for athletes on the side of what we were doing, and we would help them to sell merchandise that they had autographed through the website. So we met this guy, Roger Clemens. He had just signed on with the Toronto Blue Jays as their new ace pitcher. He was a good guy. We liked working with him. It was really off to a great start. But soon after that, a terrible thing happened. Roger was traded to the New York Yankees. Well, we couldn't find Roger, we couldn't get Roger, the site wasn't being updated. We were so starstruck and smitten with him when we first met him that we hadn't signed any kind of like official contract that said what would happen if he got traded, or if he disappeared, or what would happen. At that point in time, we were in big trouble. Four years later, after having been on the edge of annihilation personally and professionally, and bankruptcy, and thinking we were going to lose our homes and everything that we had, we sold the company for $18 million cash.
They really focus on the failure and what went wrong, but they also share the lessons that they learned if they would do anything differently, and really what can the audience take away from it to help them avoid some of those same mistakes and learn along with them. It was started in 2012, really organically by a group of entrepreneurs who were having a round of mezcal shots and got to talking about some of their business failures. Walking away from that conversation, they felt like it was the most honest business conversation that they've ever had, and they decided to do it with a bigger group of friends, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Gut, ich habe 7 Unternehmen mittlerweile gegründet, eine ganze Menge an Fuck-ups erlebt.
Porque mi fuck-up.
What did you fuck up?
Fuck-up nights. Adelina Ruano.
Co taková fuck-up night?
Jakože jsem vám přeložil ten fuck-up. Protože si...
I went to my first fuck-up night when I was living abroad in Tel Aviv, and I just fell in love with the event. It was different from anything that I've seen before. So when I got back, I decided to take it on myself and launch it here in Toronto.
My ADHD helps me succeed, but it does not stop me from fucking up for some reason.
I wanted to give a shout out to my wife here. She asked me today, what's this event all about? And I was like, I'm just going to stand up and talk about my fuck-ups. And she's like, you mean like today? How long is this talk? So, I love you.
I think it's really good for people to highlight not just the amazing things that are happening in the business, because especially with social media, we only see the highlights of people's lives.
Hearing about people who actually face failure, big failures, bigger than I could imagine having and succeeding, that's inspiring stuff, man. That got my juices flowing tonight.
When you're building and when you're an entrepreneur, you're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And so when something bad happens, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm a fuck up. Don't let the fuck ups overshadow the wins. Really take time to celebrate it, because I think the wins in entrepreneurship don't happen often enough, or they're not celebrated enough. And if you fuck it up, that just doesn't mean you're a fuck up.
The beautiful thing about failure is that it touches every industry, it touches every person. It's what makes us all human.
Let's take a look now at a story we'll have for you tomorrow night. Radiohead is returning to Toronto for the first time since a fatal stage collapse 6 years ago. Now the National has new details of what went wrong.
The last time they came to Toronto, Radiohead lost one of their own. Coming back isn't easy.
There's still so much that's unresolved around the accident. Still a lot of very raw feelings amongst ourselves, amongst our crew.
Part of the problem? The lack of answers.
It's 6 years now, 6 years without answers. It's 6 years carrying that sense of wanting to do the best thing for Scott and for Scott's parents, and actually not being able to do that.
It's actually embarrassing for this province that a tragedy like this sort of went this many years without a lesson that's yet to be learned.
But perhaps not for long. But a report we obtained reveals about the fatal Downsview collapse. That's tomorrow night on The National.
Welcome to the 90s!
The season finale.
My Y2K supplies. I'm at 7 tacos now.
Partying like it's 1999.
OMG!
Yeah! Back in time for dinner. Season finale, Thursday at 8 on CBC.
Remember Blockbuster? It's been a few years since the last of those iconic video rental stores shut down in Canada, and pretty soon you won't be able to find them in the U.S. either. This empty parking lot, a sign of the times. 2 Blockbuster locations in Alaska have officially closed their doors. They're in Anchorage and Fairbanks, and they're selling off their stock in a fire sale over the summer. So that leaves just one lonely store in all of North America. And that Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon, has become something of a tourist destination. Now, we asked some of the employees what it means to be the last one standing, and their responses, our moment of the day.
What's it feel like to work at the last Blockbuster, Taya?
Oh, it's pretty interesting.
It's a lot different than working anywhere else.
It's about us connecting with people that we get to see every day.
Absolutely.
All the great customers that come in all the time.
Yeah,
like
our regulars.
Our regulars are great. We know their kids. We know a lot about them.
And you got so many customers coming in and people buying stuff just so that they can get a Blockbuster card.
Probably 20 to 50 customers off the top of my head. We've really built relationships with everybody in town.
It used to be really slow and then all of a sudden this small town ideal has become like blown out of proportion nationwide.
We love our Blockbuster.
We do love our Blockbuster.
I do love working here.
You know, I often lament the passing of record stores, or at least the way we used to have them before. I kind of forgot about how much I like the neighborhood Blockbuster. Now, you're a little younger than me. You're a lot younger than me. Do you even have memories, Andrew, of a Blockbuster?
Yeah, of course. I'm not 9 years old. Yes, I still have memories of them. But I mean, they're just generic memories. They weren't anything particularly special. Maybe if I lived in Bend, Oregon, I'd think differently. I don't know. How about you?
But you know what? About 6 blocks from my home in Vancouver, there was a big Blockbuster. And I remember when the kids were little, we would go there, just kind of like those employees were saying. We'd be there lots of times, you know, especially before the weekend. You get to meet lots of people. So, and I go by the building now. It's a real estate office now, shockingly, and kind of miss the old days.
Yeah, well, so apparently, if you do, in fact, miss the old days, Blockbusters, I just was learning about this today, they still exist, going strong, well, you know, maybe not going strong, they still exist in Australia, of all places. They've got a social media presence, a magazine, a regular, they've got the works, so you can just fly on over there if you want to get your fix. That is the National for this July 17th. Good night.
Good night.